everyone. My name is Robin Julies, born and bred Cape Townian. Um, I am a mental health worker and as well as a researcher. So, as everyone has been saying, we found ourselves in unprecedented times. I don't know how many times we have heard that term, but it's true, as annoying as it is. And so I'd like to share a bit about my experience with my clients that I've had last year and then this year. In terms of what we experienced, what all of us experienced, and how that impacted people on an individual level, but also a much broader level. So the first thing I think during very hard lockdown that all my clients asked me um, is that why do I feel so tired? Why do I feel so anxious? Yes, I know there's a pandemic, but I know I'm not gonna get sick, so why do I feel this way? Why can't I just stop myself from feeling so down or feeling so, we will say, um, depressed or anxious? And they didn't necessarily have the terminology for it, and the expectation was that you just snap out of it. Um, but I think what we didn't understand initially is that it was a big deal. It was a global pandemic, so it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. So if you think about it, 24/7, your survival was threatened. Um, there were constant concerns about you might catch the virus, you might give this to a family member whose immunity might have been compromised, your job might have been compromised by this. That means you didn't have income. That means you are not able to feed yourself, your family, care for your loved ones. So constantly your survival was threatened. So at a very basic level, it's very normal that people were feeling stressed, people were feeling anxious, people were feeling depressed. And then the other thing was that we were now not able to see our loved ones. We needed to separate from them. Humans are social beings. We couldn't go to work and interact as normal. We couldn't decide, oh, I'm meeting my friend for coffee. People who lived alone, who usually had contact with other people, now just had to stay inside all day. It also meant freedom was taken away, their sense of freedom. So if you think about it, what does it like if you think about a caged animal just being stuck in one space the whole time? It's not quite the same, but it could feel that way, it could translate that way. And I think that's a big part of where people's fatigue and frustration and acting out also came in, because like I'm stuck inside, I don't have my family, I might not have a job tomorrow. All of these things, I might get sick, I might die, I might be the one with, whose immune system is impaired, and I might die. So all of that constantly for so long, and then not having the understanding that this is why I'm stressed, and this is why I'm struggling to cope. And if you still had a job, being concerned that I might lose my job because I'm not performing as I should. I'm not working fast enough at home. I have kids at home. I'm struggling to balance work life with kids life because I live in a one room space. And how do I balance this? Not knowing, we were not prepared for these things. It's not how we operate. We had to shift completely. We had to change basically everything that we know for a very long period, and none of us were prepared for that. So, in my mind, obviously, as a healthcare provider, it seemed very obvious about why we are feeling the way we do, but my clients didn't know that. And maybe if I could backtrack a little bit, my 9 to 5 is as a researcher, and I am a registered counselor. And the reason why I saw clients again last year, because in my community, they asked for skill sets anyway to help engage the community. So some people cooked, some people sanitized, some people got food to people who didn't have food. Some people did, um, picked up medication for people who couldn't. People used their skill set, and I um, sat with it for a moment and thought about what can I do? How can I contribute? What could be my role here? Because when things shift that quickly and it's about all of our survival, um, it's quite powerful to see how a community can mobilize itself, actually a country, if you will, or the world can mobilize itself. And it was this beautiful but also horrendous experience for me in my mind that I'm seeing this, um, how community mobilizes, how people come together for each other, how we really express that sense of Ubuntu while we are under such severe stress and we are actually constantly being threatened, if you will. So that's how I started. Um, Most of my clients, actually, sadly, were women who experienced abuse in their houses. So the way I now had to shift in my counseling, and me and many of my colleagues, was we did telephonic counseling. So usually someone would come for a session, they would be in a safe space. We can create a safety plan in the case of abuse, and that person is relaxed and safe for at least 50 minutes to an hour. So now suddenly I found myself in a space where I was on the phone with a client who was standing somewhere in a shop, um, or at a friend's place because they couldn't take the call at their home, obviously, because of an abusive partner. Um, this caused so much strain, because this person, on top of a whole global pandemic, now has to consider other factors, other safety factors. Um, and for myself, holding in my mind, how can I still give this person the best service? I'm already so removed from this person. Can't really see facial expression, you can't see body language, which I use in my skill set, which I use to help my clients process feelings, which help me in therapy to see things that I wouldn't normally see. I couldn't access any of those things, um, but I still had to, as a mental health worker, provide this client with the best service and also help this person to be safe, because, of course, that's my job. Um, so this became much harder, and my job became more difficult in terms of boundaries. So it's a very boundary job to protect my clients and then, of course, also to protect myself. But now I found myself calling safe houses. Now I found myself, um, getting into social worker territory, calling hospitals, because some of my clients would just disappear, not answer phone or text, and I would need to see where they are they safe, what's going on for them, try and give them tools constantly. People accessing me up until 11 p.m., so me not shutting down, my colleagues not shutting down. So managing my clients' safety, their stress, their anxiety of a global pandemic, abuse, and managing my own feelings of how is this person safe, where are they alive, and still being objective enough to be able to provide a safe service. So there were all of these complexities now in my work that I had never experienced before. And accessing my colleagues in supervision, I would go to therapy to try and, resolve these feelings so I could still feel okay to do my job well enough. Um, and constantly hold my client in mind that I'm providing the best service. So the pandemic was not just like, oh, we might get sick or we might not get sick. There were all these other factors. Um, People losing their jobs and saying to me, I'm not able to pay you, I'm not able to pay any therapist, but please can you help me? How do I tell my wife I've lost my job? How do I tell my wife that I can't feed us? How do I tell my husband that I can't contribute anymore? How do I tell my kids this? Constantly those questions of what do I do? And as a healthcare professional, my job is not to just give you an answer. My job is to help you plan and help you think through using your resources. But that became so much more difficult because what are your resources now? We don't even know because the landscape has completely changed. You go to a community center where you could usually access food, but now they're only assisting homeless people for this week. So what do you do now? Do you go to church and you have to have food parcels? Um, do you go to the local clinic and ask, do you know of any other resources? And to help those person access tools that feel so flimsy because you don't know, are they spending their last 10 grand on taxi fare now to go see if the church is handing out food parcels and they're coming back empty handed? You just don't know. So for as a healthcare provider, that was quite strenuous, and also constantly keeping in mind, and something that was drilled into our heads: client first, always. But that means self-care must be on 1000% for myself. um, so what does that look like now? So yes, I see a therapist, yes, I engage with my colleagues, but now my therapist is experiencing the same thing as I am. My colleagues are also experiencing burnout. My family still has an expectation that I should be present for them emotionally as well. You know, I should fulfill my role as a daughter, as a sister. So how do I balance all of these things? That continue to be the question. And as lockdown extended, it became harder and harder to kind of keep myself up, as you will, and keep myself in a position to be able to provide a good service for my clients, and make sure that they are safe, and make sure that, you know, on some level that they have some kind of resources. Um, so those things are, I think, the main things that really stood out for me during this pandemic. What was amazing though, what was really beautiful, what stood out for me, is as a species, um, we are so resilient that it's beautiful. Um, we adapted, not easily so, but we adapted. We showed up for each other. We made things work. We created resources for ourselves if there weren't any. So a lot of, and this might seem fluffy, so a lot of coping mechanisms that clients use, for example, was just stepping outside of their house while they were working in a shack, in a small space, or whatever where they stayed. They would just step outside and breathe. That's one of the simplest things, one of the easiest things, something that felt doable, and initially very resistant on it because it just felt fluffy to them, but it made a difference in their headspace. It made a difference when they went back inside. They were now not shouting at their kids at the top of their lungs and trying to access the Zoom call, and their internet is not working, they're using their phone's hotspot. Something that seemed very chaotic in their mind shifted just because they decided to reach out for help, and they employed something as small as that. Exercise was the other thing. And I must say, I followed my client's lead on this. So my space is not that big, but I made it work. Because we know exercise has benefits, but it just takes us so much to actually do what we need to do. Um, but one of the most important things I'd say in terms of helping people cope was reaching out to a friend. An amazing initiative that someone also did in my community, for example, is, and I know it gets annoying, but they had set up a system where you kind of express what your need is in the community. So you could say mental health worker, you could say a friend, just someone to talk to, you could say I need food, and they'd kind of link you with the person who was responsible for that. And so people just found friends in their community that they would ordinarily not speak to just have some kind of human contact. So they'd have a WhatsApp video call just to see another woman, human. Um, Older people were taught how to use smartphones. Shame, that was such an amazing thing to see, so that they could call a family member, so they could hear their voice, see their faces if they lived alone. Because also as an older person, if you're alone, it's not that you have that many friends. So isolation is already um, a problem as you get older. But now having access to people help to relieve that anxiety, help to relieve symptoms of depression. Um, it just helped to feel connected to someone else. So that was a big deal. And then obviously access to food and access to places of safety. And reaching out and saying, I need help. Um, so that was an amazing thing to see, because it's not something that's easily done. And in this case, people were forced to do so. So those were all things that stood out for me in terms of coping, and it was amazing. The other thing I kind of observed in practicing and assisting people, um, parents would often say, "My kid is restless. My kid is just so frustrated. My kid is showing signs of aggression and helplessness, and or hopelessness. Rather, they just seem flat. Like I don't know what to do, or they're just bored." And I think we forget how sensitive kids are. So if I, as a parent, I'm constantly feeling anxious, I'm constantly feeling angry and frustrated, that's what your child feels. If your child hears, "Oh, how are we gonna figure out food for the week, for the next 2 days?" Your child hears this. Of course, they're gonna also pick up on your anxiety, and they're also gonna start worrying. And because children don't have um, necessarily great coping mechanisms, because they are children and they don't know that yet. They can't process their feelings as we do, can't manage them as we do. It often comes out in a sense of hopelessness, or them just being flat, not wanting to do anything. It often comes out in frustration, or it seems like they have an attitude. Um, all the colored aunties are probably raising their eyebrows now when they can't get their attitude. But at the same time, they have no other way to express that. They can't go outside and play with friends really, because COVID. Um, they are. It's not like they can just really pick up their phone, depending on age, of course, and phone a friend. It's not the same for them. They need interaction. They need play. They need to pick up things outside, and they need to engage that way with the environment. That's how they learn. That's how they grow. That's part of becoming an adult and learning things, engaging with your world. And so suddenly they couldn't. And to manage this as a parent, I take my hat off to you. I actually don't know how you achieve that. Just keeping kids cooped up in the house. Um, but it was crazy. There was no other way to explain that. It was a lot for parents. It was a lot to keep kids entertained, engaged, and now suddenly their education, also their formal education, also shifted. So how do they handle that? And yes, kids are quite resilient and they adapt quite quickly. But we as adults didn't have the system figured out initially, right? So how is this education gonna work? How do I don't have we don't have a computer at home, but you have to have homeschooling. So now there's gonna be things on my phone. So does that mean you must use my phone the whole day? Like, how does this happen? I don't have enough money to feed you, but I must have data. So all of those things constantly that children picked up on, we didn't have it figured out. But our expectation was that they kind of fell in and understood it, with their limited understanding of the world and life and how to behave with those things. Um, And I suppose now with the vaccine and as we lockdown has lifted, now we kind of have to socialize kids completely differently because yes, you can play with your friend, but keep it at a distance. So what does that look like? Because we are playing fight fight, or we are playing with the same clay, or we are playing whatever, but now how does this work that I'm supposed to keep a distance? Or I don't see my one friend because my mom feels their parents are not safe. So now I'm experiencing loss as a child, but I can't tell you that. So instead, I'm just gonna cry. I'm gonna be frustrated because I don't actually know what loss is or what grieving is, but I still have to follow the rules. So as hard as it was for us as the adults to shoulder all of these burdens, um, I think it was so much harder on kids because they didn't have the range to express themselves as we would. Um, like how does a child ask, I want to see a therapist, or I want to talk to you because I'm sad? They don't do that. They can't do that. They don't have the language or the know how or they just kind of act out. That's what children do. And then it becomes our job to kind of see how to help them. And sometimes that was a hard thing as well because, again, they didn't have the language to express what they were feeling. We didn't have the language. So yeah, this is all of the things that I saw and experienced with clients. And then for myself, at some point, contracted the virus, was very sick, um, then needed to kind of manage family um, because they were concerned, and I'm fairly healthy. And then at the same time, thinking, am I going to see clients again? How is this going to impact me when I see clients now? Am I going to add to the anxiety of, oh, I might contract the virus and die? All of these things I needed to manage in my own mind constantly when I sat in front of my client. Um, so it was a very interesting period. It was a very hard period. But I think my takeaway is that for within my field is that telecounseling is a very effective method um, in certain circumstances. I think there are many barriers to telecounseling, of course, because if you live in one room space and you have five other family members, how do you make that work? Where do you go? So there's definitely a space for that. But I do think that in our practices, sitting one on one with a client in a room, I think we've definitely been made more aware of what that space needs to look like and feel like in terms of safety. And I think it has taught us the value that these spaces matter so much. And if you are not of sound mind, if you are not okay mentally, if you're under extreme stress, if you are constantly anxious, it impacts every single thing in your life. It impacts your immunity, impacts your ability to function. And so while mental health has a very small space in our communities, it's a very necessary one. And I found space in my head to really understand how important this job is and how important my role is in a community. If I've ever questioned it before, I know now it's a necessary one. And then the other thing is that I've already mentioned, lessons learned, is that when we want to, we can achieve whatever. Um, so thank you for listening, and thank you for engaging with this.